Welcome everybody to another Massachusetts Envirothon webinar. Today we get to hear from Mathew Cahill from the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation on the benefits of an urban canopy and why trees are so important. I'll let you take over the screen share and take it away. Thanks for being here with us today, Mathew.
Great, thank you so much. Let me know when you can see that.
I can see your screen. There we go. It is ready, and I'm going to make myself go.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for tuning in today for this discussion that we're going to have. Just minimize a few things here. All right. The talk today is about the benefits of urban canopy. I'm Mathew Cahill with the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation in the Urban and Community Forestry program. And so you've probably heard in the news now, it is trending. You know, it is a topic that people are talking more and more about as we get into changing climates and changing weather patterns and increased density in urban areas. And, you know, more people, not just in, you know, sort of the picture here, this is Chelsea, Massachusetts, you know, kind of high density, you know, a multi-story structure, multi-family buildings, but all across the Commonwealth and all across New England. We are becoming more urban as a society. And so as part of that, we are losing forest. So what we want to try and make sure that we do is retain that urban forest, that urban canopy cover for the benefits and for people's health, and also for the health of the environment, which we depend on. So talk a lot about that today, sort of, you know, my agency, what I do, why this is important, and we'll end with a case study. So this picture that you see here is one of our planting crews with our sort of flagship program, the Green and Gateway Cities program. We're planting trees throughout the Commonwealth for all the benefits that we've talked about, that we will be talking about today. I'd like to start with a question. Trees. What do you think of when you think of trees? So I'll give you a moment to reflect. But we have a lot of sort of the popular, you know, ideas that kind of pop up. People start talking about trees and they think of, well, obviously right now it is New England. And we do have an economy with tourism, and so leaves and fall color, you know, that's a really big part of it. You can't have canopy without leaves. So it's probably the number one thing people are thinking of. And then also there's maintenance involved in that, you know, raking leaves, taking care of, you know, wherever the leaves are landing. Perhaps it's your sidewalk in front of your house that you're responsible for. So a lot of this is the leaves, because the leaves also help keep the trees alive and provide, you know, the area for photosynthesis. And then what do those leaves do? What does that canopy do, right? It's providing shade. So a lot of people think about shade when they're thinking of trees, especially as climate warms. You know, we're having hotter days and we're having more of them. So, you know, you think about some of where you spend time in the summer, you know, you'll sit underneath the trees in the park, you'll be relaxing underneath the canopy in the shade. Even inadvertently, you know, you may not think of it, but you're just naturally going to be drawn to standing in shade. People think about roots, you know, obviously it comes down to the ground and that's where you're interfacing with that. You know, the sidewalk gets heaved, there's some tripping hazards. So nobody really thinks of roots fondly other than arborists probably. And then obviously the branches that sort of hold the whole thing together. Maybe you were someone who in your youth liked to climb trees, or maybe you liked watching bird and wildlife, you know, go up into the trees or nests or anything like that. And it could be that, you know, a branch broke and fell in the yard or something. So with all these things, there's both those sort of those pros and cons. People have mixed feelings when it comes to trees. And it's our job as urban foresters to communicate the positive and the benefits while addressing, you know, some of those perceived negative interactions. But overall, what I'm hoping to get here today is to make you think of this tree, not just as something that's functional in our landscape, but as a living organism. And that's how you're going to have to understand the interaction with the tree to understand trees and benefits and how it impacts you and your life. So clearly we need trees, for all the benefits that we're going to talk about today. Our society wouldn't exist if it wasn't for trees. If there wasn't wood, we would have never had ships. We never would have crossed bodies of water. We never would have crossed oceans, so we wouldn't have had fire. We wouldn't have fire in the fireplace if it wasn't for wood. So the amazing properties of trees and in wood have really moved along human civilization. And we've been completely dependent on it for everything, for food, for shelter, everything that we had up until recently with the introduction of synthetics. What do trees need, right? You go back to your basic biology. Here's a nice image, the whole photosynthesis cycle. The roots are taking up water, bringing it into the leaves. You have photosynthesis. It's creating the sugars, and it's feeding the tree. This is also a good diagram, sort of the root structure. You have to think roots of more being large and spreading, not so much, there's some popular older images of just inverse of the canopy underground. That's not necessarily true, because the trees, as we know, need air and water infiltration in the soil so they can pick up the water and nutrients. So you'll actually have roots higher and farther out than you would anticipate. But here's just some interesting stuff about trees. The largest organisms that have ever lived. They've dominated dry land for over 300 million years. Very, very advanced, very successful. Over 800 species, filling just about every niche that they could live on, and they cover 30% of all dry land. And they're also some of the oldest, longest lived organisms as well. So I'm sort of biased. I'm sort of partial to trees, obviously. And that's how my career got started in sort of forestry, traditional forestry or natural resource management, and then into urban forestry, which is more the trees interfacing with people and the public. And I work for the State Department of Conservation and Recreation, so we're a public entity providing service. And here's our mission: to protect, promote, and enhance our commonwealth of natural, cultural, and recreational resources for the well-being of all. So a pretty large mandate. Here's a whole bunch of things that we do. If you think of the places that you've gone for recreational opportunities, maybe it's a playground, maybe it's a beach, a state park, maybe it was a ice skating rink or swimming pool. All that is owned and managed by DCR, with thousands of employees and thousands of dedicated people out there every day trying to create good world-class interactions for the people of the state and for the whole region. So as part of what DCR does on that broad scale, on the conservation side, we have forestry and hydrology. We have lots of scientists and engineers out there working on all sorts of things across the Commonwealth. It could be waterways, coastlines. So in particular, I reside in the Bureau of Forest Fire Control and Forestry. So there are state lands that do have fires from time to time, so they have a fire crew that goes out and protects those lands and the adjacent people. Bureau of Forestry manages state lands for a variety of reasons, for timber, for natural resources, for wildlife habitat, for water quality. And one that we are trying to communicate more is carbon sequestration, the importance of these large tracts of land remaining undeveloped land, so that it has the potential to take in carbon and help slow climate change. But in urban forestry, what we're doing is working with folks in any area that people exist, essentially. And we assist these communities and nonprofit groups in protecting, growing, and managing community trees and forests. We provide grant programs and technical assistance, trainings. We just had a tree steward training program last month. So you can check our website, and we have lots of great information there. You can pass this information on, and I think this will all be made available at the end of the talk as well. We have 50-50 matching grants. It's money from the U.S. Forest Service that's brought down to the state level. And then we have these grants available for communities and nonprofit organizations to apply. It's either a 50-50 matching grant where you have to put up that amount. So if it's a $20,000 application, the group would put up $20,000. Or if it's an environmental justice area that we'll talk about later today as well, it's the 75-25. So that matching amount is lowered, so you actually get more funds for the project. We do have a Citizen Forester newsletter here that we'll be putting out again shortly. We have the Green and Gateway Cities program that I talked about. If you're curious on any of the information I provide today, you can go to maurbancanopy.org to find out more information, to see some of the trees we have available. We also administer the Tree City USA. So you come into towns, maybe you've seen a sign, 27-year, continuous Tree City USA, all these great designations. And that tells you that the city is, serious about their urban forestry goals, that they're providing funding for it. They have a tree committee or board, that they have some sort of tree protection in their town, and that they're taking this seriously, which is great. And be on the lookout for our annual Arbor Day poster contest for 5th graders, if you happen to know folks in the 5th grade. Oh, jumped ahead a bit. And so we are at Urban and Community Forestry. Here are the list of resources. If you want to go to this website later, again, these will be made available. But we have lots and lots of examples. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel if your community is interested in tree protection laws or the state laws that are out there, Chapter 87, funding for your urban forestry program. You have a tree committee if you want to enact some tree protection ordinances or bylaws to ensure that your trees in your town are protected. Some regulations and a bunch of examples from other communities. So check that out if you're interested in more resources. And these urban forests that we talk about, what exactly are they? Well, it's the trees, plants, and that associated ecosystem. So basically all that thing, and wherever people live. So where it interacts with people, it could be, all the way here on the left, country roads, to our suburbs sort of in the mid and throughout the states, or to those, concrete cities like Boston, Worcester, Springfield. A lot of the old mill towns are what we refer to as the gateway cities. There's trees and people all across the state, just at varying levels. And it's not just about the trees, it's that greater ecosystem of plants, animals, water, wildlife, soils, because it's all connected. If you're interested in the environment, which you are, because you're paying attention to this presentation, it's not just one of these things. We tend, as when we get into our careers and become scientists and specialize, we tend to focus on a few of these things. But let's not lose sight of the fact that it's all connected, and that each one of these is going to help the other. This is actually a tree planting that we did in Lawrence, Massachusetts, along the greenway that they have there. And believe it or not, the trees were chewed on by beavers. So they've done such a good job of cleaning up their rivers and making these areas more livable that wildlife is coming back, which is great. But you also have to remember that trees are part of the ecosystem, as are most plants, and they actually provide food and resources to wildlife. So if you want those trees to actually grow to a larger size, you have to put up some protection around them. And the health of that and the quality of that urban forest will affect our quality of life as well. So they directly affect our, like we just talked about, clean the water, the air, stability of our neighborhoods, our sense of community and individual pride. People like the parks, they like green spaces. People want to be around trees and green space. I don't hear too many people saying that I just want to stand in the middle of a parking lot staring at a brick wall. So people understand this inherently. And we want to keep those ecosystems and those services healthy so that we in turn remain healthy. And who doesn't like a good tree planting? These are good moments. Planting, teaching, celebrating brings people together. Everyone can rally around trees. Everyone can participate with trees, and strengthens our community bond, and creates a better space. Community parks, community gardens. The words right there, community, and it's very important, and it's a lasting legacy. The trees, live beyond us. They, will last for hundreds of years if we treat them right, and they really are a legacy for future generations. Now to the facts. Unfortunately, we are losing our trees. So here's some information from a webinar. So Urban Forestry Today, and there'll be some resources on that at the end as well. You should definitely check that out. It's about once a month, put on by UMass Amherst. Some great information on urban and community forestry. So nationally, our urban tree canopy cover. So as we talk about that, think of Google satellite view in Google Maps. You're looking down and you can see the tops of the trees. That's what we talk about when we talk about urban tree canopy cover. Like So if I took a square, how much of that square is green? So that's what that percentage is essentially. So let's say nationally, if you took all the urban spaces and you cut it all up into squares and looked at all the squares, it's about 39% in total, nationally on average, would be tree canopy cover. So that's a good number. A lot of our major urban centers are nowhere near that number. So we're trying to get a lot of our urban areas to be close to that number. In the areas that we're currently planting, it's probably more like 15% canopy, 20% canopy. It's not very high. So they've broken it down in number of trees and acres and all that, and all these benefits. And we'll talk about analyzing these benefits. There's a program that the Forest Service has called iTree. If you Google that, iTree tools, you'll find lots of online free programs that you can put your local tree information into and come back with actual dollar amounts, actual benefit numbers, which is great when you're trying to convince people of the importance of these trees, especially decision makers, policy makers, the elected officials who have to sort of decide how these budgets are being formed. You say, well, you're getting $50 million in benefits from this urban forest. You should maybe put $10,000 into tree planting and tree pruning, so that there's some sort of return on investment there that they can look at and decide, okay, yes, these maintenance costs are important. So as we become more urban, we also become more impervious. So houses have rooftops, you need a road to get to that house, you need sidewalks and driveways. So all those things exclude soil and grasses and plants and trees. And also impervious tends to absorb heat and then re-radiate it later in the day, whereas green spaces, trees, help shade and cool the surrounding area. The impervious does the exact opposite, where it increases the heat. We'll talk about that later with that urban heat island effect. So population growth is the driver of all this. Why are we losing trees and why are we becoming more urban and why are we becoming more impervious? Well, we need more places to put people. So in the last couple hundred years, the world population has just skyrocketed. So around 1800 it was 1 billion, it's about 7.5 billion now, and just going up and up from there. I think it was about maybe 30 years ago, world population was about 4.5 billion. So it's not just that it's increasing, but it's increasing at a very high rate now. It's building on itself. And so we have to figure out how are we going to handle this? Where are we going to put people and how are we going to have planned development or what they call smart growth? All right, we don't want just complete urban sprawl. We want to have smart, planned, protected growth. So we have our green spaces and our living spaces. So here's some information about our state. As of recently, this is a little bit dated, but recently, 62% forest cover, so that's the green places on the map, and the red indicate, that impervious areas where people live. So you see Boston, obviously, greater Boston. You see that go out west to hit Worcester, and then you see it go all the way over to Springfield in the valley there. So it's spreading, and how do we make sure that we don't just go red from one side of the state all the way across with complete impervious development? So we have to make sure we manage that. It's a very densely populated state. So we're the third most densely populated because it's so small. Private land ownership is most of what we have here in Massachusetts. So over 75% of the forests are in private landowners' hands, and they're making those decisions just based on generational change. Like, okay, grandma and grandpa own this farm, own this forest, they're leaving or passing on. What's going to happen now? Maybe the grandkids don't want to deal. They sell it. It's sold, turned into a subdivision, and it's lost forever. So a lot of this is happening. Only about 20% of Massachusetts is protected from development in the forms of perhaps state land or local conservation commissions, local land trusts. They're doing a great job on trying very hard to get out there and protect land that is not yet turned into impervious and keep it in some state of natural processes. And as you can see, between 1980s and 1990s, Massachusetts was losing 6%, and Worcester County was losing 7.9%, and the growth just has continued. So as we look at these areas in red, those developed areas, those impervious areas, we have to remember that we should be focusing on redevelopment. How do we take an area that's vacant, use it again, and not just look to the next step? People thinking, well, there's vacant land, but the land is actually doing something. The land is essentially, providing the resources that we need to live. Your clean water isn't coming from that parking lot. Your clean water is coming from the sky, which then lands on the land, which is filtered through the forest and into our water systems. And we need to maintain that. Wildlife, plants, our farms, our food, all of this is coming from land that is open or not developed. So encouraging and thinking about smart growth and redevelopment is very critical for these next stages in the next couple of decades. So why are people like myself, an arborist with the state, conservation department, why am I so interested in trees? Well, trees provide us all of our benefits that we've been talking about. So here's a list. I mean, this list goes on, and we'll talk about this, off and on throughout the talk. But essentially, through that process of photosynthesis, it's taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. And that's the gist of it right there. We need plants to breathe. Carbon dioxide, it's part of this greenhouse gas. It's part of this, global climate change and this accelerating heat that we're having. So if that's being taken in by that plant and locked into the form of wood and held in place, it's taking it out of the air. So carbon sequestration is a very important process of tree growth that we're starting to look into more and more and pay a lot more attention to. Obviously, trees are cooling their area. They're transpiring. You saw that first picture where the tree's taking up water, bringing it up to the leaves. Some of that water is let go in the form of water vapor. So it's like a giant air conditioner, essentially. Not only is it cooling the air just by shading the other surfaces, it's actually releasing cooler water vapor and moisture, and it's reducing not just the surface temperature, but also the ambient air temperature. So the ways in which trees cool are extremely useful and extremely powerful in these hot urban areas. Like I said, trees are aesthetically appealing. People like trees. They have birds, wildlife. You can sit under them in the shade. So the aesthetics is, it's real for people who are in real estate or development. They say curb appeal. They want to have some nice trees around a home, quote unquote nicer, neighborhoods or where the property values are higher tend to be tree lined, communities or areas that have preserved trees over the years, and areas that have been historically discriminated against through redlining and other practices are being called environmental justice areas, saying that they have less access to things like clean water, clean air, trees for shade. And those typically redlined and marginalized communities have less tree canopy cover. There's that trees are actually providing human health. The trees actually filter air pollutants, which again is heavier in our developed areas. And in areas like Springfield, what they call the asthma capital of the world, they're doing studies with tree canopy cover and the amount of particulate matter that trees are screening and trying to see the links and relationships there. So this goes on and on and on, but got lots to talk about. But keep this in the back of your head as we talk about the trees today and all these different benefits. But importantly, what do we do? How do we keep our trees protected? Well, the first step would be keep what you can. So in this picture here, we have a tree protection zone around existing mature trees, because yes, you can plant new trees, but yes, it's going to take them, 50, 75 years to get back to the size of trees that are already there. So keep the trees that are already there. You get a 50-year head start. You get so much more canopy that way. And really, the reason why people would do this is if you can explain to them those values of those large mature trees. And we'll talk about that in a second. But also, we can replace what is lost. So obviously, we live in a very old part of the country, 300-year-old development here, towns celebrating their tricentennials. So there's been a lot of development, people living here a long time. So we do need to replant. We do need to calculate those future benefits. So with tree protection in general, if you think about on the left here, this is the tree's sort of profile. If you look at the diameter of that tree, you want to convert that essentially to feet and use that as a radius to go around the circle you see on the right there. And that's just sort of a minimum critical root zone, or what we also can refer to as the drip line of that tree, or essentially where the edge of the branches are. So if you set that up with that orange fencing like we talked about earlier, and keep people from driving on it and bulldozing it and tearing it up, your tree will have a much better chance of survival. So this is something that can be done with tree ordinances or bylaws in your community for tree protection, and in fact should be, because it's really one of the easiest things you can do to try and retain tree canopy is don't destroy what you already have. So again, go to itreetools.org. So it's just called iTrees if you're Googling it. And iTree Design is a really good tool. There's a whole bunch of different tools there. But again, this is through the Forest Service and partners about calculating benefits of trees. iTree Landscape is a good way if you want to just get an overview. We've been talking about sort of that satellite imagery and tree canopy cover. And that's what it will show you there. You can assess canopy in your local area with a couple of other applications here. Or use iTree Design, where you can really zoom into a particular house. You can sketch out the house on the satellite image, select where a tree either is or might be if you want to get future benefits, and then you can run a quick analysis and it'll tell you the value for a variety of different reasons. Stormwater interception, tree cleaning. A lot of the important ones will be coming from energy savings. You get tree even heating and cooling savings, because even in the wintertime with those winds, trees can act as a screen and slow down those winter winds and actually reduce the amount of fuel you use to heat your home. So what is it all? These are called essentially nature-based solutions. These are actions to protect and sustainably manage and restore these modified ecosystems that address societal challenges while simultaneously providing well-being and biodiversity benefits. So this is what we want. We want nature-based solutions. Here's a picture, Division of Ecological Restorations going around, paying money and helping out with grants for removing these old dams that were put in place. Again, we had a lot of mill towns that we talked about. They're now gone. So let's restore those waterways and those old pathways. And they're starting to, fish are coming back. They're seeing all sorts of benefits, like we talked about in Lawrence earlier. There's bald eagles, there are beavers, the wildlife will come back if we can restore these habitats. And that will in turn provide more area for natural vegetation, which provides a better ecosystem for all of us. What can you do on a local level? Well, plant trees and remove. So impervious is the worst. We want to break that up. Lawn is also not great, but we as Americans are obsessed with lawn. I'm getting a message here that my connection isn't great, so I'm going to pause for a second. All right, I think it's back. So what we're saying is that we want to, if possible, even take up some of that lawn area and replace it with plants, shrubs, trees, taller grasses, because the way it works is that water has to infiltrate into the soil, the surface, and then percolate throughout the soil. So a lot of this urban fill, this compact soil that we have is not great for plants. Lawns have a fine, dense surface root that reduces the amount of infiltration, and lawns are just not as effective to reduce stormwater runoff. So this is a perfect week for this discussion. Go outside, see where the water's pooling, we'll see where it's piling up, see where all the issues are, and you probably won't see it as much in forested areas. Why is that? Well, because that's the way nature had designed it. You go out in the woods, you've got a canopy, you've got an understory, you've got plants all over, you've got roots, you've got organic material. Soil's made up of particles, various size, there's different compositions. We have nice loams around here. Maybe you have sandy loams. You have a bunch of different types of soil particles. And in between, there's space for the roots. There's air, there's water, there's nutrients, there's everything that the tree needs. And there's an existing microorganisms in these soils, which help connect to the roots and expand the tree's amount of absorption to break down minerals. And this is all accumulating through leaf litter. urban soil lacks all of this. The first thing that happens, right? It's fall, it's that time of year, everyone goes out, rakes up all their leaves and gets rid of it. Where that could have been mulched down and turned into more nutrients for the soil, for the microorganisms, for our living sort of network that we're trying to establish in the soil to create healthy living spaces for plants. So why are we so concerned about watershed benefits? Well, we are the Bay State, right? We have water everywhere. We've got rivers, we've got lakes. This is Chelsea, Massachusetts, where we started our Green and Gateway Cities program. There's a big sort of equipment yard that was right across the street from where they bring in the salt from far away and use it to salt all of our roads for safe driving. So we came in and worked with some local partners in the city to plant trees all around that area. So we're reinstalling essentially urban canopy in this. It'll slow down any stormwater events. The water will be taking up wells in these other areas and pick up all these things in the water stream that we don't want. So this can help reduce that and keep things out of our waterways. So this idea is catching on all over. This is the Muddy River restoration in Fenways in Boston. This was a river, and then in I think it was the 40s or maybe earlier, it was put into pipes and put underground. And now they're doing what's called daylighting, is opening it up again, getting rid of those pipes and letting it go back to being a natural waterway. Because they understand the benefits of the natural flow. There's so much more water retention that you can fit than versus if it's in a pipe. It slows the water down during these stormwater events, these big rain events that we're having. Now that we're having climate change and then days like today, inundated with rain, you need area to fill up and sort of slow down instead of just going into a gutter, which goes into a pipe, which shoots out into the ocean. So they spend a lot of time and effort. Like we said, daylighting this, or essentially putting things back to the way they were. So millions of dollars and lots of people hours to get things like this, get things back where they should have been in the first place. Now that we understand the benefits of this green infrastructure and what it can do to protect our waterways, our coastlines, there's all sorts of issues with water now that we're seeing more intense and more frequent rain events than we had in the past. So a big key part of all this is removing impervious. So if we can do more of that, then we're getting ahead of the game. So in a lot of the areas that we work, again, dense urban areas, lots of impervious. We want to get some trees in the ground. We try and plant trees, sort of in yard spaces where there's more. We talked about good soil structure for the trees to exist. But we also want to break up impervious. We do want to put trees in some of these public right-of-way spaces so that we can, cut out a sidewalk and break up impervious. That helps to reduce the heat island, like we talked about, getting rid of those materials that will retain heat and then re-release it later in the day. And it increases the rooting space for trees and increases the soil volume for all those benefits that we talked about, water infiltration, natural nutrients, etc. So here's a typical downtown. This is close to Boston. I think this might be just Somerville, Cambridge. You look across, there's Everett, obviously. Not a lot of space for trees, so you get the rooftops, you get buildings, again, concrete, streets. That's what leads to that urban heat island effect that you've heard about. So in the surrounding areas, the rural areas, you have forest and canopy cover. You get more, blacktop roofs, impervious as you get closer. And then where you get to these downtown areas where it's highly concentrated in development, you get those heat spikes. So clearly we do need urban developed areas. We need places to have people live, but we just need to have more green space and more canopy to help cut the peak, so to speak, with this heat. You also want to shade these structures so they don't get as hot and less likely to re-radiate that heat later in the day, which we talk about some of those peak energy loads. We talk about energy efficiency savings. It's really people get home in the later half of the day, turning on the air conditioners. The longer you want to cut that peak and lower those temperatures and have things cool down quicker. So here's a shot, the Com Ave to the public garden and to Boston Common, New York City, same idea. Having these nice green spaces to help cool down these areas. As heat is becoming more and more of an issue than ever before with these hotter days. Extreme heat kills more people than hurricanes, flooding, and storms combined. So it really is a major source of weather-related deaths that are being observed. And these urban forests, again, we saw those benefits at the beginning. They provide billions of dollars in heating and cooling cost savings every year. So let's keep them for as long as we can. Urban forests lower local temperatures by up to 10%, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and possibly even more in some cases. And trees are good. We talk about this all the time. Trees are good. People, for communities, it's necessary. And we need to start investing, not just in our gray infrastructure, which we have no problem investing in, but we should also be investing in our green infrastructure. So here's Chelsea and Revere next door. These are two of our planting zones with the Cahill program. And we're starting to put trees in the ground. There's little green dots on these maps. These are a little bit older, but essentially what I want to show you here is the Lake Trust for Public Lands has done some heat maps. I'm getting another internet connection warning. Take a break for a second here, let it buffer. So this is a urban heat map. So obviously redder is hotter, and you can see these areas where there's either industrial or lots of multifamily, like triple decker housing. It's a lot hotter, and you can see some of the green spaces where it's a bit cooler. So what we did is we went and planted in those urban residential areas, and this is not a heat map. This is a tree map. So the greener is the more dense, and you see how it overlaid those hot spots in Chelsea. We have put our green spots over the hot spots in an attempt to cool them down. And this map was from a couple of years ago. We've now hit our first tree canopy goal of 2,400 trees in the city. We hope to really get those energy saving benefits that we're looking for and reduce that urban heat island effect. So there's all sorts of information out there now about public health, and you should Google this later. Type in canopy and public health or trees and public health. A lot of information out there. Boston Globe has this good article. It's talking about how hot Boston was. And this is nationally, not just around here, but nationally. It's extremely hot. Extreme heat was the leading cause of those weather-related fatalities like we talked about over the last 30 years. Extreme heat makes air pollution worse, which amplifies existing health issues like asthma. These low-income neighborhoods and communities of color have faced disproportionate impacts of extreme heat. Again, those historic discriminatory practices like redlining, what's happening in these urban areas. This picture is from an area that we're planting in Lawrence. There's just green space was not incorporated into this development, the way these houses were built and planned. These areas just historically tend to have less green space. So we're actively, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, not just at DCR, but our Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs are making a lot of resources available, building parks, building playgrounds, putting in cooling, spray decks, these cooling stations for these communities to really combat this and try and flip the script and make things better for all people in the Commonwealth. So a big issue there is that the extreme heat is also increasing the demand for cooling, which is straining the grid. So that's kind of where our case study is going to come in the Green Gateway Cities program. But tons of research out there, lots of news. Again, if you're just Googling, you'll find all sorts of information in the news about some really good articles too recently. BUR has some, New York Times had a nice interactive piece using tree maps. National Geographic did a couple of studies. They had a good one about Los Angeles. I think it's American Forest has a tree equity score now where you can type in a city and sort of see what how much impervious there is, how much canopy there is, is it equitably, distributed in a community or not? And then they just sort of give that a ranking. If you're looking at research, there's a lot of research out there, public health, EPA, Forest Service. Vibrant Cities Lab is also a good resource where they have a lot of different case studies available. So this, I think this slide again will be made available later, and you can check this stuff out. So knowing all that, again, what do we do here as a state, as a government entity that can enact laws and do things? Well, Massachusetts decided to have this Global Warming Solutions Act in 2008, just to start lowering those emission levels. So taking that 1990s emission level, reduce it by 25%, which we just hit here in 2020. And now our next mandate is to get to net zero by 2050. And you can see from this graph that sort of electricity, cooling, heating, getting electricity to people's homes is the largest polluter, followed closely by transportation. So, getting our vehicles electrified, there's a lot of infrastructure right now going in for electric vehicles, hybrid buses, people are tackling transportation. And then how do we make our energy cleaner and more efficient? None of this works without support and funding. So this is just a slide with lots of text to tell you essentially that our government is taking it seriously and putting funds towards it to address the impacts of climate change. There have been existing programs for energy efficiency. You've probably heard of Mass Save, where they go around swapping out light bulbs, giving you rebates. That's great. That helps a lot of people, but that typically helps, like a house like this, out in the suburbs. So it was difficult to serve, inner city renter populations. And if you don't own the home, why would you, put money into a new boiler into a building you don't own? So that's where the idea came up. Let's get energy efficiency from outside the buildings. So that way we can remove that issue and try and shade the homes with trees. So in about 2014, we started up this large partnership. It's a collaboration through multiple agencies. Again, it's through our secretariat here, Energy and Environmental Affairs. Has 6 agencies, DCR is one of those. Also the Department of Energy Resources, and they provided funding for this program. And we also try and plant at a lot of these housing authority properties across the Commonwealth, since they typically have less urban canopy in these areas as well, and obviously have lots of people living there. So Department of Housing and Community Development has been really great in helping us bring trees to where they're needed most. So what is a gateway city? Well, so the definition is, by Mass legislature, is that this mid-sized urban center. So you need to have it's a population level. So there's a range for population. There's a range for economic, income level, education level, and if all those sort of ranges are met, you essentially get these mid-sized cities where we used to have manufacturing, but we don't anymore. So we're trying to reinvest in these areas and bring them back up. These cities, we're acting in over half of them now. So we've been busy trying to get out there. And one thing you can kind of notice is that they're mostly along waterways. So again, these were urban centers for industry. And that's what we talked about water earlier in this presentation, about how important it is, because that's where the people ended up. All right, so why gateway cities? Well, there's a big opportunity for savings. I'm going to pause again, let the network buffer. But yeah, why gateway cities? Big opportunity for savings. So historically, there's not a lot of tree canopy, so we'll want to reinvigorate the area with trees. They're dense, so that's where the people live, and there's low canopy, but there's high impervious. We want to fix that. We want to get rid of more impervious, and we want to increase the amount of canopy. There's also a big need for savings. So there's higher poverty rates, large minority and immigrant populations, larger renter populations, and limited municipal resources. So the city is responsible for a lot of things. Typically, they don't see trees as a priority. They see, schools, libraries, fire departments as priorities. So it's hard to argue with that. So we want to make the funding available from alternative sources like Department of Energy Resources, alternative compliance payments from utility providers, and take that money and make it available for greening these gateway cities. The target goal is a density of 5 trees per acre. And if we plant, plant for 3 years, we typically get about 800 trees per year. That's where that 2,400 trees number comes from. We want to get most of those trees on private property. So people have to want to participate. We have to convince them that trees are good. And getting them onto private property as a built-in steward. And that person signs a permission form and says, yes, you can come on the property. And they sign an agreement that says, yes, I'll water and maintain this tree for 2 years. So we want to get those trees as much as possible in the areas that they're going to grow with stewardship. We also want to break up the impervious like we talked about. We will also plant 20% on public lands. We have sort of dense planting zones. We don't plant the entire city. We limit it in size so that we can get that, again, 5 trees per acre, roughly density that we're looking for. And then once that area is planted, we can expand and move on to additional areas. So the whole process is essentially a circle. We start off by reaching out to local communities, nonprofit organizations, the cities, the schools, and make those connections, and local non-government organizations, so they can convey the message to people. They're a trusted voice and help us with outreach. So we go out, urban foresters meet with residents for every tree. There's a site visit with an urban forester, and we discuss right tree, right place. That's the RTRP. So we want to write the right species for that area that's going to survive. We have tree planting. We hire locally. So this is an employment program. We create jobs and put people to work and teach them about the green industry. And we've had lots of success with folks going on and getting either full-time jobs with DCR or local DPWs, the Department of Public Works, or other jobs in the green industry. And once people see free trees going in, then they start to believe it. Neighbors tell neighbors, and it really builds on itself. We collect data on all the trees, where they are, if they're surviving, the types of trees, so we can avoid planting monoculture, have a good species diversity, so we don't have issues down the road. And then we've built trust in the community. We have grassroots and workforce development. People tell their friends and neighbors, and then the cycle keeps going, and we get more trees planted. So again, an example in Chelsea, we had the Arbor Day event here with the city. We have had a great nonprofit in Green Roots. So there's been a lot of good work in these communities through these partnerships for planting trees that, again, people can really rally around for a variety of different benefits and reasons. So the grants that we have, one side of it is made available to the municipalities so that they can augment with their staff, get out there, help us break out the impervious, because they typically have the heavy equipment to do that. We do all of our tree planting by hand, so we're not damaging people's property or lawn or anything like that. It's very non-invasive. And then nonprofit groups also get out there and help us spread the word because they've been doing it for a long time. A lot of environmental action groups in these communities already doing this work, and we're looking to build on the work that they do. So once you have your trees, as an urban forester, I have to make these plugs. Please take care of them so they can take care of you, right? So a couple of things we want you to walk away with. And again, if you want, you can go to maurbancanopy.org and download our tree care pamphlet, which will tell you more of this. But don't volcano mulch. Do not over mulch. This is not a good thing. If you scrape this away, you ever wonder what it looked like? It actually looks like this. It encourages surface rooting because it's moist. It's the trees, the roots come up instead of going down, and they can actually slowly strangle the tree over time and create all sorts of health issues for the tree. So over mulching, volcano mulching, is very bad. Try using this 3-3 method instead. Make a 3-foot wide mulch ring, about 3 inches deep of mulch, just the right amount to help regulate soil temperature, keep moisture on the roots where it needs to be, and also it looks nice. And it will provide sort of a physical space to keep mowers and weed whackers away from the base of the tree. Also pull the mulch about 3 inches away from the root flare, as you see there, where the trunk comes down and becomes the roots. That's the planting level tree should be planted at, by the way. You want to see that root flare kind of exposed into the ground. Fertilizer is not really recommended. There are other ways to go about sort of reinvigorating urban soils. We talk about compost, we talk about mulching. There's even it's called biochar. It's old technology that's becoming new again. So you can Google that too, learn a little bit more about some soil additives that are organic and do a good job of retaining water and nutrients. Most importantly, for any new plant, it needs water. So remember, trees are just big plants. They need lots of water. We recommend 15 gallons a week for newly planted trees. And that's all at once. You want that soak in. Remember, infiltration, it's got to get down in there, and percolation through all the soil strata, and get down to those roots. So water slowly, not with sprinklers. A healthy, long, sort of deep saturation is what we're looking for. And then remember to protect. If you have a lawn growing all the way up to the tree, you'll see this a lot. This is that weed whacker damage or mower damage. That's right where that living tissue is, the cambium layer that divides into the phloem on the outside and xylem on the inside every year, creating those annual rings. And you want to protect that. That's where all the action is for the tree. So if it's cut all the way around, it's called girdling. It'll actually kill the tree. It doesn't have any more cells to grow and to pass the nutrients down through the stem. Here's a pruning technique called a 3-cut method. First you do your undercut, then you come out the distance, the diameter of the branch, do your top cut, and then you can come back and prune a final cut. You don't want to do a flush cut. You want to leave that branch collar intact. And there's lots of good information and videos out there on pruning that you could look up later as well. So this all comes to right tree, right place. We did mention, we talked with the Department of Housing and Community Development. This was an infographic we put together specifically for them, but it's good to illustrate the utilities out there. So we're in an urban environment. There's a lot of infrastructure. So you call 1-800, MISDIG, essentially to mark out tree utility or mark out utilities anytime you're doing any excavation, but also tree planting. But with trees, you have both overhead wires, power lines, cable lines, etc., and underground, like here you see water and gas lines. So those need to be all taken into consideration when planting a tree, considering the tree's mature height and spread. What's it going to look like? Is it going to be like some of these trees, narrow and upright? Will it be, larger and spreading? Is it evergreen or coniferous? Will it be green all year long? Making sure that the tree is in the right place. And that's really what our urban foresters excel at. If you have information on that or questions on that, you can contact a local forester for more information. So help however you can. People ask us all the time about native trees. Yes, we do plant native trees, and we do like them. Here's a great reference, bringing nature home. The number of beneficial organisms that live on some of these native trees, oaks and willows, being some of the most prevalent. So the author likes to say, a plant isn't doing anything if it isn't feeding something. So sometimes you go outside and you're like, oh, wow, something's chewing on these leaves. It's like, yeah, something's supposed to chew on those leaves. Insects, which then feed the birds, which then feed, it's the food web that exists out there. We shouldn't think that we need to spray and put pesticides and herbicides on everything, because that isn't actually going to help. So we want a good balance of native trees, which are susceptible to diseases. So you do need to buffer that with some trees that can tolerate the urban environment. And that's not to say that they're invasive, but they're just exotic or not naturally occurring trees we plant as well. The issue would be is we have what's called invasive plants that destroy habitat for native plants and insects and animals. They're invasive because they seed readily and escape. So like oriental bittersweet here on the left, climbing into trees, taking over native plants, and ornamental pear there. You can see it flowering along the roadways sometimes in the early spring. You know that it's escaped out of its natural area, probably where it shouldn't be in the first place, and gotten into our woods. So the same issue with insects. We have natives, beneficials, chickadees flying around. All of our birds, need lots of these protein-packed, insects to survive. So it's a very important part of our ecosystem. But coming from the other side of the planet, brought over and without any natural predators, we have insects like emerald ash borer, which is killing all of our ash trees. Asian longhorn beetle killing a lot of different trees, 13 or so different species, but predominantly maples being attacked and killed by these insects. So the issue there again is our ever expanding population, our need for stuff, and our globalization isn't inherently bad. It's just that the packing materials that are being sent over because we're consuming so much aren't fully treated. So you don't have like wood, like your desk, completely treated and dry wood that doesn't have living insects in it. Packing pallets and shipping materials will come over with essentially green wood, just recently cut down, so that the larva that's inside it can still complete its life cycle. So when it comes here, it emerges as an insect and then is able to get into our trees. Those are the big issues with our natives versus invasive pests. All right, running low on time. So to wrap up, we have tons of resources. Please check all this out. Pause for a moment here. All right, looks like it's buffering. Check out our urban and community forestry fact sheets, which can also be found here. Basically, you go to mass.gov, type in urban forestry, all this stuff will come up. But a lot of the stuff that I've talked about today, you can find in our fact sheets, good breakdowns of, siting trees, planting trees, pruning trees, community boards, all sorts of, everything we're talking about today, you can hopefully find one of our fact sheets available for download online. You want to find more information, check out our UMass Extension's Urban Forestry Today webinar series. Every community should have a mass tree warden. We have over 100 years now of Massachusetts having a person responsible for your trees in your community, and that person is called a tree warden. You can go to masstreewardens.org for more information. There's a lot of good education. You can find out who your local tree warden is and ask them all sorts of questions about trees. More available for free Googleable items. Cornell University recommended urban trees. Vermont has a tree selection guide, and UMass has just completed recently the Planting for Resilience tree planting guide. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about, again, right tree, right place, gives species characteristics, height of trees, does it have color? Does it have fall foliage? Is it providing berries for wildlife? Lots of good information on trees if you're interested in planting. And your question is, well, what should I plant and where? A lot of these guides should be able to help with that. So there we go. This brings us all the way home to, essentially think globally, but act locally, planting a tree. It's that legacy. It's something you're going to remember, so if you haven't done it yet, this spring, maybe for Arbor Day, find out what your town is doing or encourage them to do something and get out there and plant a tree. Again, it's not going to be just for us, but it's going to be for future generations as well. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was really neat. I will post a sheet with all of these links in it so that people can get to them, since you can't click in the video. Or you can reach out to Mass Marathon to get it from me if you can't find it, if you're watching this in a funny place. And thank you for all those great ideas for getting teams out and planting and identifying equity level of tree plantings in their local environments. I think that's really, really neat. Great to see all the work that's being done. On a slightly different topic, would you be willing to talk a little bit about how you got to where you are in this job? Like, what did you study in undergrad, and how did you get interested in this? I think.
Yep, I went to New York State College of Forestry. So there is such a thing. If you're interested in environmental careers, there's some colleges that specialize in it. And mine was in Syracuse, New York, and it was really great. We actually have, land and campuses upstate with it's the Adirondack Mountains. I don't know if people are familiar with it at all, but you can go up there and do lots of studying and research and really get out in the wilds. And I worked up there for a while. And I started to miss people, so I moved to New York City, became an arborist. So that's the difference, is that forester deals with sort of tracts of land, and arborist deals sort of with individual trees. And that was kind of my transition. Eventually coming back to Massachusetts. I was born in Lowell, so it feels good to be planting trees there and sort of giving back. But there's a need for trees everywhere. I planted a bit, worked in Southern California a bit too for a cool communities program there. So it's been around a while, this idea of putting in trees for the benefits of canopy, for energy efficiency. And it's great to see it spreading, even in what we consider a cold climate here. We have way more heating degree days than cooling degree days in the Northeast. So that's why it's important to see benefits on both sides, to see some, heating fuel reduction as well as, shading in the summer months.
Very neat. Thank you. I was just reading about a local project here in Holyoke to tell stories about the trees around town that that families have planted. You could submit your story of the history of this tree for folks who have lived here for a long time, or I think there was some local research in terms of when some of these more prominent trees were planted. It's very interesting historical perspective as well.
Absolutely.
I like our trees. Just need to think about how important family history can be around a tree, around a property that's been in the family for a while, or good neighborhood stories. So I thought of another question and now I can't remember what it was. But I will make sure that teams know how to reach out to you if they have questions, and would like to get more involved. And really appreciate your time, effort, and expertise today. Thanks so much for being here.
Great. Thanks for having me.